Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session called Product in 2021, Building for the Next Normal. My name is Erica Jader. I'm the VP of Product Design at SurveyMonkey, and I'll be your moderator for today. Before we get started, of course, we have just a few housekeeping items to go over. The session is being recorded and will be made available to you afterward. We'll be sharing some data from our brand new 2020 CX Research Report. You can access this and other resources in the Resource tab. We'll also be doing a Q&A at the end, so please don't be shy and submit your questions through the yellow Q&A widget. If we can't get to your question, we'll follow up after. And lastly, there will be a quick exit survey at the end so you can let us know how we did. So in the session today, we have a panel of world-class product design leaders who are going to be sharing how they're adapting to challenges today and taking these learnings to plan for 2021. We also did some original market research, and I can't wait to share some of the insights and get some thoughts from this panel. So first up, of course, I need to introduce you to our esteemed panelists. First up, we have Adam Fry-Pierce. He's the Director of Customer Experience Programs at Envision. Adam, give us a little wave.
Hello, here's my little wave. Thanks for having me, Erica.
Thanks for being here. We have Linda Quarles, Director of Organizational Strategy and Practice Lead at Frog.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. And we have Andrew LaMonica, VP of Design Leadership at Northwestern Mutual.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Andrew, great. So happy to have you guys here. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm going to jump right into the content. That's the reason everybody's here today. So my first question, what does the new normal look like for you? What trends are you seeing and how are product teams responding? I think Adam, love to kick this one off over to you.
Yeah. So for some context, I have the absolute privilege and honor to oversee a community of design leaders all over the world called the Design Leadership Forum. It's how I know everybody here on the call. Yeah. And what that is in a nutshell is it's a bunch of different design leaders and executives from enterprises and scale-ups and some in between. But what we do is we listen often to hear what the top challenges are. So when COVID hit, we were in the perfect position to kind of be that intersection to hear from design leaders who are representing all these different companies from all over the world as to what the new normal looks like for them. And if you fast forward to today, we can really bucket things into three different stages. I'm calling them stabilize, standardize, and scale and mature. So phase one was all about stability, right? It's triage. There was a need to quickly burn down your roadmap since that was built for a world that nobody is in anymore. And for a lot of teams, they're still there, just in a matter of weeks, pretty much the ground shifted between our feet, or underneath our feet, sorry. A lot of compromises were made. Design was done in a kind of fairly unconventional way. Teams were hunting for silver bullets, and they were just trying to ship out value in any way that they could with a really difficult environment. And for those that were fortunate enough to kind of find their footing, they moved on to phase two, which is really all about standardization, right? So maybe volume had slowed down. Teams had kind of figured out how to operate, in this distributed environment and being able to reach out to their customers in this kind of very familiar but different world, which we are calling the social distance economy. And for what they're really doing is they're trying to figure out which disciplines do they need to up level to best perform in that social distance economy. A lot of teams are going to research, which I know we'll talk to in a little bit, because that was a missing function for a lot of teams. And then phase three is where very few teams are, and that's okay. They've triaged, they've found their footing, they standardized their new practices for this new world, and now they're actually maturing and trying to figure out the best way to scale their team for the world ahead. A lot of the rest of the world doesn't necessarily fall in the bucket that we are in the States, but this looks like it's the state of things for quite some time. So the big question is, how can teams best connect with their customer in this very familiar but slightly different world where the best way to connect with your audience is predominantly through the screen, and future-proofing for that state. So that's kind of the world at the highest altitude for how teams are preparing and how they've been reacting to everything that's happened over the last year.
I love that framing. Linda, tell me a little bit about what you're seeing.
Yeah, I guess I'll kind of start low and go high in terms of first talking about individuals and teams and what we're seeing. One of the things that it's done that's really accelerated for us at at least with Frog, is we do have like 13 studios globally. And I would say in terms of the work that people are doing, we have way more people working across studio and across the globe than previously. It's like almost completely inverted, whereas it's pretty, in the past, unusual for you to be working on a project outside of your, what we call your home studio. And now it's almost the complete opposite. And I think that's really, in the best way, brought the ability for us to move a lot faster, for us to be able to bring much better kind of diversity of thought into the work that we're doing. I do think there is a bit of a challenge in terms of like building relationships and trust, which is so important when you're moving fast in a responsive environment. So you miss a little bit of that. So we have to, I would say we're over engineering that side of it. Whereas in the past, you know, you're just kind of getting to know people, bumping in the hallways, you know, in your like kind of daily studio rituals. And now we're being really deliberative about designing trusted relationships. I would say we didn't always do that. I think the first few weeks were a little bit bumpy in that regard. We just thought we could throw people in program and that it wouldn't be impacted. So I think we're really seeing that firsthand. So I think over time, the quality of the work itself is changing in a really positive way. So then just bringing it up to your question about product teams, I would say the idea of who's in product is really expanding. It's like the product team used to be, you had your job title, you were the person who are owning the product, you had the roadmap, you had, right, you know, sort of you knew the release schedule, and now it's become really, really a lot muddier. I think in a good way. I think that people outside of that core product team are getting a real appreciation for what it is to build responsive products. They are really learning a lot more about what it means to be kind of quick on the take against feedback. They're really learning a lot more about prioritization, which is always a challenge in product teams. And I think changing the conversation around prioritization, changing the conversation around what's really required in the moment, you know, adjusting the roadmap. I think I've seen a pretty broad spectrum of how adaptable teams have been on adjusting the roadmap. I think that's been a really big one. And then I think the other thing is just being responsive and taking in customer input. I think the ways that we're capturing feedback from customers is changing. The sensing mechanisms are really moving at warp speed. And I think making sense of all the data is something that we're challenged with, because in a short period of time, I think our ability to capture data, which we've worked so hard to get in a really pretty rigorous and structured way, is just becoming a lot messier. Data is coming in through so many different kinds of mechanisms. So that's some of the things that I think we're seeing, and some of the things that are going to, I think, remain over time when we go back to whether what your feeling is about what we're going to go back to over time. I think some of these learnings are going to be really, really valuable. And I do think there's a spectrum of individuals, companies embracing and saying, hey, how are we going to learn from this? And how is this going to change how we're moving forward in the future, in the medium and longer term, versus some that are saying, we're just going to hang on as long as possible. We know it'll go back to normal. And I just think, you know, it's like, you guys know, it started out with 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and I don't know, where are we, 7 months or something like that? I mean, pretty different space. And I think everyone feels like, oh, the next corner is going to be different. So that's some of the
That's great, Linda. 7 months, 7 weeks, 7 days, 7 years. Time.
Who knows?
Time has completely blended together.
Yeah.
Taken to the term, using the term Blur's Day, because everything's
That's
nice. Yeah.
I love that. That's a good segue over to you, Andrew. You know, as an in-house design leader, I'd love to hear your perspective on this, in particular, how you're seeing product teams respond to the new normal and the changes in your organization.
Sure, Erica, thank you. And I think Adam and Linda bring up really good points from different altitudes of how this new normal, though I'm not a fan of that term, it's a little apathetic, but it's what we're dealing with now. I think what's going on is it's challenging. I mean, we are product leaders, but we're also the chief operating officers of our home. You know, we're taking care of work stuff, but still got to clean the bathroom, still got to empty the dishwasher, still got to fold the laundry and do all the things that we need to do. So, you know, our days got longer and we need to manage things better. You know, things are definitely in a state of VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I think there's another A, I would say anxiety inducing, but that's kind of what's going on right now. And design leaders, product leaders, marketing leaders, we're all managing from a point of uncertainty. And we have to accept that. Linda brought up a really good point about, you know, not holding product roadmap sacred. You know, things are changing and we need to be flexible and we need to adapt to that. And brands that are thriving are the ones that have pivoted their business strategy quickly. They've identified new needs of their customers, both like tangible, like what is the thing, the object that they need, and also behavioral. Like they're identifying that customers, you know, need brands that they trust and they feel secure with, or they're aligned with their values. And most importantly, the brands that are thriving have cultures that are able to adapt. So I think there's a lot of really interesting things going on right now.
Definitely. I love everybody's positive spin on the silver linings here. It's helping me think about how I take the second half of my day into a more positive place. But I think each of you in your answers in different ways mentioned feedback from employees, from the market, from the customers. Of course, here at SurveyMonkey, we love feedback. Kind of building on this, I'm curious, how do you stay close to the customer in this changing environment? And Andrew, maybe we'll hand it back to you on this one.
Sure. Well, you always have to be listening to them. I mean, Adam's going to talk a lot about research, but like research, analytics, insights, which SurveyMonkey knows really well, like those things are critical. That's like step one. You got to meet the customers where they are. You know, a lot has changed in this social distance economy, and you have to be aware of where your target audience is, where your customers are living and breathing, and how to help them in the best way. There's aspects of being authentic to what your company's values are, and being empathetic to your customers and what they really truly need. And I think most importantly is just not compromising your values as a company or as a product leader. You know, you always got to stay true to that, and that's a really good directional compass for you to follow.
Yes, values. Definitely been really grateful to the fact that we've had already developed some really strong values at SurveyMonkey. They've been really helpful in these turbulent times. Adam, what's the research telling us?
Yeah, well, to get real meta with it, my research is to research the design leaders who are telling me that research is the big punchline. That, you know, since it's been really, since all this happened, a lot of research teams found themselves quite under-resourced or potentially rolling up into the wrong part of the organization. And so we've seen it come from a lot of different directions. We've seen product team ask for more research resources, design teams, customer experience teams for those organizations that are lucky enough to have an end-to-end experience owner outright say, hey, if CX is just the emotional glue between the brand and our customers, how are we actually understanding where our customers are so that we can create, you know, meaningful spaces to, again, create those bonds and eventually deliver value out to them. And so there's kind of this like sliding scale of, let's say, like high and low maturity research teams. A lot of organizations found themselves in a really bad position to say, we need to understand what our customers are thinking and feeling today, because a week ago, yesterday, a month ago, it was definitely different. And so we essentially just saw this like big resurgence of research. It's been pretty exciting, you know, as a research nerd, it's been cool. Like there's been a lot of discussions around like, how can we do it better and how can we get closer to the customer? But that's really been like the large punchline without really getting into the nitty gritty of it all, is that research has just been that function that is being propped up and in some cases stilted up. And it's, I don't think that it's temporary. I think Linda, you mentioned earlier, like the things that this age, this era that we're in, what we're gonna be able to bring back once things standardize full time, you know, over like a decade or two. And we actually reach what the new normal is. I think that an advanced and mature research practice is going to be one of those things that every company, now that they've been forced into a position, whether by choice or mandate, to where they had to invest into this this practice. I think they're going to see all the benefits to it, and they're going to be able to act a lot more quickly. I think Andy, or maybe it was Erica, somebody mentioned earlier about having to favor agile executive planning. Well, research is that's kind of a table stakes to be able to move on a dime, right? Is understand where our audience is, and that function is going to be around for a long time.
You said mature research practice like 3 times. What does a mature research practice look like?
I would say, like, at the least, at the product level, at least, you have usability and kind of understanding, is what we are shipping out to the to our audience usable? And then if you're really talking about like future proofing, you'd have pretty advanced things like, let's say, ethnography. Like, what's the future state of our customer, and how can we take in those research practices to like kind of future proof our product line? And again, I will say, with kind of a grain of salt to that, is that you obviously can't plan too far out in advance, right? If we would have had this conversation in January, we might be talking on a time horizon of a year, or even 5-year plans with full confidence behind it. Come March, I think all of us were like, all right, back to what we were saying before, roadmaps change and they're going to get burnt down. But having an established research practice that you can lean back on, just in case you need to just build something really fast, having that there is mission critical, way beyond just usability testing, right? Not is what we are making able to be used by our customers, but are we even thinking about the right problems to be solving? And that all comes from a more advanced research team.
Yeah, one thing.
Oh, Linda, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, just to build on all of what you were just saying, one thing that we have seen for sure in the past months is this acceleration of something we've already seen, which is the ability for social media and sort of the way that the world communicates to really accelerate the amount of data that you can get as a company, right? So I think in the past, to your point, Adam, about mature research practices, even the most mature companies would have, they would have a plan and sort of like, when are we going out and sensing, and then when are we making sense of the data? And I think this feedback loop has really accelerated, and people are getting feedback that they're not asking for. I think companies are getting feedback they're not asking for, and the line between product feedback and what I would call kind of brand feedback is getting really blurred, right? And so I think there's a real strong sense of those companies who might have pretty well established mature research practices. How do you take those and then flex in a moment when you're getting unsolicited feedback, when you're getting data that you weren't actually out there looking for and sensing for? I'm thinking, for example, about Trader Joe's, and regardless of where you sit on the spectrum of your opinion about this, they got some customer feedback. They reacted pretty quickly to the customer feedback. And then they found out later that that customer feedback might have been, that their reaction was an overreaction, right? So I think, and hopefully, if you don't know the story there, you can look it up. But, there's a real balance between, in our field, qualitative versus quantitative research, which is primary, which supports the other. How do you have the stories that, light up the quantitative research? How do you back up the qualitative stories with the quantitative? And I think that whole mechanism, that whole tension is really being challenged in interesting ways. I think companies are really being forced, sometimes to make decisions on product versus brand, right? In terms of reputational decisions, in terms of what makes sense. And I think just tying it all back together to authenticity, which is where you started, Andy, and this whole conversation is, if you don't sort of know what you stand for, it's going to be pretty tough when people come and challenge what it is, what do you stand for? And so I think you need to know up front what you stand for. And I think no one's really immune. You can't say, hey, I'm just a product person, so I'm just focused on, features. And you can't say, I'm just a brand person, I'm going to let the product people deal with products. I think this holistic way of viewing the business, viewing your organization, your company, what you stand for, your relationship with customers, which I think most of the people here today, not just us, but the people, in our audience here, understand pretty well is becoming a great opportunity for us to extend and expand that. And the last, this is a kind of a small thing, but I think it can be really important, is just back to the research question, is so much of our research is really grounded in interacting with humans and observing humans. And so I think one small thing that we're really being challenged to be innovative on is how do you do a great job of capturing nonverbals in remote research. So we're doing a lot more remote research. We're talking to people, and there's things that's happening off the screen that you don't know that in a normal research environment, you're really going to capture. You see what's on the screen, but I think we had this the other day. You turn around your camera and like the room is a completely different setting than what you think you're seeing on camera. When you're in a real research setting, you can lean into that, as Andy called it, that curiosity and that listening. You can be like, hey, tell me about that picture on your wall. What does that mean to you? But if you can't see that, how do you get better at sensing sort of the whole environment and not just sticking to the script in research? So I would say that's an area in which it feels sometimes like it could be challenging to really lean into that and orchestrate that in a way that brings you back great data. But I would say the investment is worth it. And this is just back to the example, if you think this is going to last for another 2 weeks, you might be like, hey, well, just hold on, we want to invest in that. But if this is going to go on for a while, you might say, let's think about how we're going to, reimagine how we do research. I see.
Yeah. If I could just do a yes and also add a clarification point, because I know I mentioned like ethnography, which is future stating, and really all this is about trying to find the Goldilocks zone of how much input, how much feedback can we bring in at the right time within the right context, so that our brand leaders, our design leaders, our business leaders can act on it. All research is risk reduction. And that's the easiest way to look at it. There's a great book out there that I would encourage everyone to check out, which is Just Enough Research by Erica Hall. And that's really everything that you need to know about how to connect with the audience at the right time. And that was the nexus of what we were talking about, right? Is like, how can you get closer to the customer? Just enough research, just enough risk reduction, and then trying to find that Goldilocks zone is a game of experiments. And then not to be completely, Linda, to your point, I love the Trader Joe's story, not to over-index on feedback, but to be feedback informed, right? Design informed, product informed. It's all part of a larger cohesive strategy, and not completely, just being overreacting, over-indexing to the input.
Awesome. I'm gonna move us along because we've been talking a lot about data, and I have some data that I want to share with you guys and get your take on it. So we did what we do, and we recently surveyed 1,700 professionals who are involved in CX programs at their company. We found 75% said their company is accelerating digital transformation initiatives today due to COVID-19. And in case you're wondering how we define digital transformation, we described it as the continued adoption of new and emerging technologies by organizations to improve business processes, systems, and culture in order to deliver better customer experiences quickly and effectively, enabling organizations to better compete in the market. So I'm curious for the panelists, is this what you guys are seeing as well? And how do you see this impacting product and product design teams as we head into 2021? Linda, I think we'll let you kick this one off.
Yeah. So, okay. So I just want to reiterate what you said. 75% said that their company is accelerating digital transformation, defined as continued adoption of new and emerging technologies. My question is like, what are the other 25% of the companies doing? Like 75, I mean, to me, that's actually a bit surprising in and of itself, right? So I'm curious to ask a few questions of those 25% that said, no, we're not investing in technology to accelerate customer experience or to accelerate our business. The other interesting thing I would say is, from my vantage point, and at least the companies that I've worked in and work with, there has essentially an inverse relationship between how much an organization talks about transformation and how much they're actually doing it. So I would, I think it's important to have language. I think it's important to know what you're doing. But I think a lot of times, the more you're sitting in a room talking about what it looks like and not actually doing it, I think the companies that are most transformative probably aren't really talking about it that much because they know it's, like you said, it's the state, right? Companies, I mean, I am really surprised. I mean, I'd be challenged to think of a company that I am working with that is not in some state of transformation. It's pretty unusual. I think, I don't know, I mean, even the bodega down by the corner is like being disrupted in some kind of way, right? So I think it's important. And I think when you think about transformation as a moment, whether the moment lasts a week, a month, or a year, or even 3 years, I think there is that mentality of saying, okay, we're going to come out the other end of this, and then we're not going to be in this like state of, changing and sensing and responding. And so I think the companies that I see that are really doing real transformation don't really see it as a discrete activity that's separate from the way that they're running their business today. It's, everything is about transformation. You have to constantly be playing offense and defense at the same time. You have to constantly be sensing with your customers. It's very multifaceted. It's not one dimensional in terms of thinking about the quarter plus the year end, plus the 5-year, plus the 10-year, right? So they're kind of doing all those things simultaneously in an ambidextrous kind of a way. We say that we're looking for these ambidextrous entities. And so I think that's really, to me, it's funny. I think transformation is reality today. And so it's a journey, not a destination.
Thank you. Andrew, when I think of industries that might be thinking about digital transformation, banking, financial services, tell me a little bit about what you're seeing in digital transformation in your world.
That's interesting because I've been involved in the digital transformation at GE, which is a Fortune 10, the Olympics, and now at Northwestern Mutual. And similar to what was echoed earlier is that digital transformation takes time. Like it's measured in years, not quarters. And in order to see that change, there's a lot that needs to happen. But back to your original question about the 75%, I'm always interested in the question that comes after that one. Like what percentage of customers see a transformation in the brands that they engage with? Like that number is usually a lot lower because this stuff does take time. And some of the best pieces of digital transformation are incremental. And it's those little things, it's those small moments, it's those high value experiences which the customers experience and they're just like, wow. So like the short answer is yes, I'm seeing it. But the brands, like they have to in order to survive. And where I've seen the most success is when the product team focuses on those HVEs, those high value experiences. It's like, what is the 20% of the customer experience that's going to give us 80% of the impact? Like, what is the thing that's going to make the customer feel fundamentally different about the product, the service, or the company? Like, I think there's so much that goes into that aspect that really smart brands, really smart companies, really smart product teams are focusing on those moments that are game changers.
Definitely. I think that's a great point. So a little bit more data that showed up in our study. We were looking at orgs that have seen revenue growth post-COVID. There are orgs that have seen revenue growth post-COVID, believe it or not. 51% said that they were able to adapt to changing customer needs very quickly, while only 18% of the orgs that have seen revenue decline have been able to adapt very quickly. We hear a lot about agility lately and how important it is to pivot quickly. How do you define agility, and why do you think it's so important for product and product design teams to be agile? Linda, you want to take this one?
Yeah, so to me, agility is not necessarily about speed or responding quickly. It's the ability to respond quickly, and also the ability to sense when is the right moment to respond quickly. So I think it's kind of those things in combination. It's a little bit nuanced and complex, but just to say that if you're running really fast toward the wrong destination, that doesn't necessarily make you agile, right? So I think about it in that way. So the data is interesting. So I think some of the I would say some of it is probably really useful. Some of it also can be like industry dependent. I mean, when you look at something like, you know, Zoom, right, which is a perfect example, or some other platforms that are going through the roof, or, you know, Miro, probably some of the SurveyMonkey aspects are, yeah, are moving a lot more quickly and getting revenue versus some other types of businesses, which are really much more dependent on things like, you know, like really complex supply chains or sophisticated manufacturing processes, or, you know, large industrial client bases. I think, you know, there's going to be some tension there in terms of the side of growth. So I think, you know, I think there's also a bit of a caution around being too quick to respond. I think I saw some companies investing early on in things that they thought would actually help them enter into the new normal at a certain speed or a certain pace, and things really changing quickly. I don't think it's their fault. A perfect example is what happened in New York City when they started opening up the restaurants for outdoor dining. People were investing in terms of the way that the rules were, in terms of what the outdoor dining would look like. And then it was actually, I think it was literally the 11th hour. If it wasn't 11 o'clock, it's about between 8 p.m. and midnight the night before the restaurants are supposed to open, the city had changed the rules, right? So it's like kind of this sense of like, okay, so then you had to go and reinvest. So if you had sort of spent all of your money already and investing in a certain way, and then had to quickly change on a dime, it can be challenging. So do I call that, you know, being agile or not? I think, you know, I don't know if those companies would think of it or look at it that way, but how do you respond to that in that moment? And I saw some really, I would say, creative, inventive ways that people were responding to these rules about 18 inches between the people in the cars and the sidewalk. And I think, you know, people just like really just literally grabbing people off the street to help them construct these new things in their building. So to me, that's a lot about the agility as well, right? It's being flexible in that space. So I think it can vary by industry. I think it can vary by sector. And I think that I'd be curious. I want to dig into that data a little bit more with you guys and see, you know, what's behind the ability to respond quickly and the rapid growth. So I'm really curious about the data. I'm glad you guys are sharing that with us. And I think it'll be really fun to lean into it.
Well, what you just said about like, it's so much, it's like just because you react doesn't necessarily mean that you are agile. And so many of us get really caught up in frameworks, right? It's like, that's like the thing right now is let's debate frameworks, what to label something. And then in 2 years, we'll come up with a new label. But underneath like the idea of let's go ahead and define what agile is real quick so that we can all talk about it. So if a lot of organizations weren't agile pre-COVID, I would say like they created a plan and they stuck to the plan. And then by the end of the quarter, they would measure if the plan was effective or you know, if you're on a half-year plan or annual, you essentially would come up with your plan. You get to the end of it and say, did we do good or bad? And then they would iterate at that threshold to move on. And what this entire environment showed us is that that's a pretty it's not exactly the best way to go about ensuring that your business is going to be successful, or that your team is going to be successful, or your product is going to be successful. And so when I talk about agile, I like to say that it's favoring the act of planning, or that you favor value over necessarily plan. And that's not to say that planning isn't useful. The act of planning is highly useful. We should all be planning at all times and learning and iterating and continuing to take that and become better and better and better. But to go ahead and stick to like a rigid roadmap, and anybody, I would say that most businesses, it's like just, you know, bit down as all this was happening, say like, we're going to stick to what we think is true. I'm guessing that if you didn't change your roadmap and you were especially in a consumer facing organization, maybe if you were in a specific B2B vertical, this wasn't as true, but I think any consumer facing business had to change what they were doing, or they, you know, potentially didn't end up on the right side of history throughout this entire thing. But so when I'm talking about agile, I'm not bashing the act of planning. I'm just saying that you favor value over a plan. And so earlier when I mentioned in phase one that a lot of teams had moved into more of like an agile mindset, even if they didn't officially subscribe their entire product development flow to agile, just the act of saying, how can we be more proactive by creating a more agile way of business planning is really all I was trying to get at. And I think that, again, we talked, this is probably the third time it's come up on this call. What are some of the lessons learned that we're gonna be able to take forward into like best practices in the future? This will be one of those things, whether you call it agile executive planning or not. This will be one of those moments that I imagine any executive, any decision maker, any budget owner that was in the power of what I just mentioned, budget, decision, strategy, in the future, they are likely to take this lesson learned and use that as kind of one of their guardrails moving forward. How can you favor value over a plan itself?
Building on what Adam said, it's not exactly a framework. Maybe it's more a freedom in a framework or guardrails to that approach. One thing that I've seen that's been effective is like an agile approach to design leadership. And there's a couple aspects to keep to which just work. Like one, psychological safety, like trust your team and have them trust you. Another thing is constant communication, transparency of information, just keep those flows going back and forth. The top down command and control, where there's like one person as the gatekeeper and dictating all stuff, that just doesn't work anymore. The team of teams approach, where people who are closest to the problem are going to be able to solve it better. Give them authority to go do that. Make sure everyone's aligned to the same outcomes. And the most important thing, if you get anything from this, after you've done psychological safety, the constant communication, the team of teams approach, giving them authority, get the hell out of their way. Just let your teams do great work, solve the problems, and address the customer's needs.
Yes, get out of the team's way.
Amen.
We're all busy here on this call while our teams are off at creating value. I love it. Let's just keep chatting and make sure our teams are still creating value. Good. Okay, so last data point I have that I want to make sure to share. Because of the pandemic, digital channels are being used more than ever. That's near and dear to our heart. In fact, 80% of respondents say that digital interactions with customers have become more frequent since COVID. How does this impact product teams? How can customer feedback play a role in your ability to deliver a good digital experience? Andrew, what do you think?
I think something that we've all talked about, and we all speaking about this at different altitudes, at different aspects of business, but it kind of feels like that's the most important thing. Like you should be doing that. The Apples, the Amazons, the Nikes, the Netflix, that's a major data point in delivering a best-in-class customer experience. You just got to do it.
Just do it. Easy. No problem. Get busy. Linda, what do you think?
Yeah, I think in terms of the amount of increased, digital interactions, if you think about what does that mean for an individual user, I'm interacting a lot more. So I think sometimes, maybe simpler is better. I'm thinking about right now, we're in the season of starting up with remote school. And I think, what they really just need is for it to work and for it to be reliable and for it to not have, any parents out there will know, like the bells and whistles is really not right now what is needed. The definition of a good experience is pretty low bar right now in a lot of certain geographies and in school districts, and depending on who your provider is and your platform. So I think you have to really be thoughtful in thinking that, more interactions not necessarily is better. And then the other thing I would say is like the interactions are really increasing in scope. I mean, so much we've talked about customer experience. This whole field was grounded in the idea of customer experience, but our skills and capabilities are really being expanded to employee experience, talking about supplier experience, vendor experience, sort of the whole ecosystem is really broadening. And before when, let's say you're working in some, B2B to B business where that digital experience was not so important because of the fewer number of interactions or because of the what you view as the complexity of the data and the interaction is really being challenged. And this happened before, this year. I mean, I think we're, person doesn't walk up and be like, hey, I can suspend the fact that it's 2020 and just, believe that I live in 1985, right? In terms of like the tools that I have access to and my interaction experience, right? So like people don't do that anymore. I mean, it worked for a while, but people are not necessarily comparing you to their competitors. They're comparing you to the things, like Andy said, that, the Apples, the Nikes, the Starbucks, they want that same experience from regardless of whether they're in a consumer engagement or a B2B engagement. So I think that's really important to think about as you increase your digital interactions. It's not so much what we might think of as, I don't know, I just think we started out with this idea of having magical experiences and delightful experiences. And I think just the reframing of that is really important.
What you made me think of just now, Linda, is the rapid proliferation of Apple Pay availability. Like I think back to, 8 months ago when, half the stores would say like, oh, my thing doesn't take Apple Pay now. And now like the thought of getting my credit card out of my wallet, touching my wallet with my dirty hands, pulling my credit card out, handing it to a person, it feels like such a thing of the past. And that transformation, it's not that Apple Pay didn't exist before, but that transformation happened so quickly and is so simple and so important in this time. So there's just some great examples of things we've seen move really, really quickly.
Yeah.
And if I throw one more viewpoint on to this question.
Love it, Adam.
Taking what Linda just said, so the main question is, how does customer experience play a role in building a good digital experience? And Linda, what you just said is everything, right? Simple is likely better. So if we think about really what all product teams are doing, we're solving for humans, right? And let's look to some of the most ancient technologies that have been out there where humans can exchange values and ideas, and that's through language and story. And if really all we're trying to do is create an end-to-end story for how we can deliver value to our customers, really we should be looking at feedback is just one more way to inform the story. Research, one more way to inform the story. Stakeholders as well, one more way to inform the story. All those viewpoints kind of coming together to create that simple story. That's been probably the biggest, I will say, back to the DLF and being able to look at all these different teams around the world. The ones that seems to be doing the best, some of the ones that Andy even mentioned is the examples that we all think of great brands. They all seem to be subscribing to this general idea of simplification as to how they are sending out value. And I think that that's going to be a major shift over the next like 2-3 years. When we look back, it'll be like, wow, we really overcomplicated a lot of stuff. Simplification is I think that we're just going to see a more simple approach to how we can actually ship value out to customers for sure.
Coco Chanel. You guys know Coco Chanel, like pile it on and then take something off, like get rid of something, the last thing. So
that's great. Andrew, any other thoughts from you on this one as we kind of wind down our last couple minutes here?
I would just like to acknowledge that all of the insights that came from this call and the idea that people are normalizing like data and insights and research. And I think the more brands are doing that, the more companies that embrace that as a methodology, we're going to get better products. We're going to get happier customers. We're going to, most importantly, to business owners, they're going to increase their revenue. So there's a lot of really good stuff that's coming out of this, and I'm really excited to see where it goes.
That's a great note as we wrap up here. It looks like we are unfortunately out of time for questions today. This conversation, there was just chock full of so many insights. So apologies to those who asked the questions in the chat. We will be sure to follow up with you individually. Before we end the session, don't forget to check out the Resource Center for the free resources, including the 2020 CX Research Report, which of course I mentioned throughout the session. Adam, Linda, Andrew, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join me today. This was the highlight of my day. Super fun to have a conversation with fellow design leaders. Big thank you to our attendees. And of course, in the spirit of feedback and collecting data, it would be great if you would please take a few minutes to fill out our exit survey, which will be coming to you through a digital channel. So thank you all very much and have a great afternoon.
Take care.